Hey everyone, I'm Jesse from Rude Tech, and today we are going to be building one of these. While I open this, let me introduce you to my quarantine hair. But here it is. This is the kit that we're going to be building, and I teach this class to kids at a summer camp every single year for like the past 7 years. We have built fuzz pedals, little mini synthesizers, little sound generating toys, chorus pedals, and every year I teach kids from 7 to 17 how to solder for the first time. Usually I go really into depth about how to solder, and I repeat the process with them over and over again. This is the first time that I'm giving kits to adults. And so in this video, we're going to touch on how to solder briefly. The first 3 solder joints will review how to solder, but from there it's just going to be build from there. If there's interest in much more lower level detailed videos, I can make those. But from all the feedback that I'm getting from people, it sounds like everybody has their own tools, knows how to solder. They don't need recommendations on tools to get. They don't need a in-depth look at how to solder. They just want a quick refresher, and then they want to know step by step how to build the pedal. So that's what we're going to cover here. At the end of the video, I can give you a lot more information, but for now, we're just going to build the pedal. Let's get started. In your baggie of parts, this is the first thing that we're going to end up using. So go ahead and grab this out and put it in your workspace. For the first couple joints, again, I'm going to be doing things really basic, and then I'll move it up closer to the camera so that we can see a little bit better. But for right now, I'm going to have a workspace like I imagine you have a workspace, which is just a flat area. So start warming up your iron. We're going to go through the resistors first as we review soldering, and then the rest of the time we're just going to build. So R1 is a 2K resistor. Again, I'm not going to go over super basics like resistor color code and things like that. I'll just tell you what resistor bands to look for. For our 2K resistor, in your baggie you have this little blue cylinder, and it has red, black, brown. So this is a 4-band resistor color code. If you have any trouble finding this, just look for the one with red on the end. There should be another one with red on the end, but this one's red black instead of red red. So once you've found that, grab the cylinder and bend the leads down, just like that. And then do the same thing for the other side. Again, more advanced solderers know about this, but I'm doing things really basic at first. The silk screen shows us which side of the board the resistor or the individual part goes on. So if you flip it over, for example, you see that there's a part that's going to go on this underside laid out by the silk screen. But my silk screen for this shows it up here, so I'm just going to poke it through the holes. Make sure it's nice and flat to the board. See, it's nice and flat, and then all I'm going to do is hold it, bend the leads out slightly. You know, not too much. Just want to hold it in place so that if anything happens to it, this resistor is not going anywhere. So let's go ahead and do this first solder joint. If you've never soldered before, the most basic instruction I can give you is hold your soldering iron like a pencil in your dominant hand. I'm right-handed, so I'll hold it in my right hand. And hold your solder like a pencil in your left hand, or your non-dominant hand rather. Then you're going to touch the iron to the pad and the lead, feed in a little solder. You're not moving your iron at all. Heat goes on, feed in a little bit of solder, and then the solder goes away, and then the heat goes away. So heat, solder, heat away, and you're done. And try not to move the lead while it's drying for about 2 seconds. If you ever have any trouble and you find that you have to press your soldering iron in to get the solder to melt, or if you're holding it and things just aren't melting, if it doesn't melt within like 2 seconds, just get out of there and then start over. What we want to avoid is overheating your workpiece and causing damage to the board. So I'll do it really quickly on a flat surface like you probably have at home, and then I'll raise things up so you can see a little better. So the process is heat goes on, I'm touching the pad and the lead, feed a little solder in, gravity sucks it through the hole, and then heat comes off. And that's it. That's our first joint done. Again, for the first 3 joints, we're going to go a little bit more into detail on how to solder, and then the rest will move a lot faster. So if you're more advanced and this is really painful for you to watch, don't worry about it. Next, we're going to use this tool called right angle clippers. There's a flat side and a not so flat side. These things are like $5 on Amazon, and they're the Hakko ones. Or is this one Hakko? No, it's not. But they're $5. These are the best ones I've ever found, and I mean, they're super, super cheap. Flat side goes on the board. You're not cutting things perfectly flat to the board. You're cutting down to that little volcano. So you see that the soldering joint, I can roll it in the light and it looks nice and shiny. And I'm not cutting off the volcano, I'm just cutting off the lead. So there's still that nice pointy solder joint. Alright, now that I've soldered things flat to the ground, kind of like you would, I'm going to raise things up. I'm going to use one of these. Again, this is not super necessary, I'm just doing this so everything's a lot easier to see. Cool. So with that, let's do a little refresher. Let's do our second soldering joint. Once again, nice clean tip. Heat goes to the pad and the lead. I feed in a little solder, then the heat goes away. Inspect your joint by rolling it around in the light. See, it's nice and shiny and covers the pad and the lead. Now I'm just going to clip. Oops, I left a lot. There we go. It doesn't have to be super flat, but just see, I want it, that volcano, that joint is still there. But yeah, just inspect your joint, make sure, oh, flowed through, covered everything, very nice and shiny. And that's our first component done. So let's move on to the next component. We'll review soldering one more time, and then from here on out, we're just going to build. The next component is a 2.2 mega ohm resistor. So another little blue cylinder. Just like the first one, this is going to have a start with a red band. There we go. Red, red, black, yellow is what we're looking for. This last band indicates the tolerance. This is gold. Doesn't really look gold, but looks brown. But anyway, red, red, black, yellow is what we're looking for. Bend the leads down. And then stick it in the hole for R2. It can go either way. There's no polarity on resistors, so don't worry about that. We'll only have to worry about that when we get to the diodes. Make sure it's nice and flat to the board. Bend the leads out slightly. Let's go ahead and do our third solder joint, and this is going to be our last review on how to solder. Iron touches the pad and the lead, and then we feed in solder, and then the heat goes away. Iron on, solder in, let gravity suck it down the hole, heat goes off. Again, if you have any problems and it takes more than a couple seconds, just back out, let everything cool down, start over. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the next pad. All right, that's 2 components done. Inspect your joints, make sure they're nice and shiny, roll them around in the light, and go ahead and give them a clip when you're happy. See that one I cut just a little bit too low. See how it's nice, it's flat. It's not going to screw anything up. But this is one good thing to go over before we just continue building. If you ever have any problems, 9 times out of 10 you can fix those problems just by reflowing the solder. So I mean, normally I wouldn't fix this, but I'm just going to heat it up, let it flow, and now I know everything's great. Everything's shivvy. Alright, so if this was your first time soldering, go ahead and review that as much as you need. From here on out, we're just going to build though. Resistor 3 is a 47K resistor. Our 47K resistor looks like this. Yellow, purple, black, red. Yellow, purple, black, red. Insert it into the R3 position. Any direction is fine. And solder it into place. R4 is a 680 ohm resistor. You could actually modify your circuit by changing the value of this resistor. We can get into that a little more advanced videos if you're ever curious. This one is blue, gray, black, black in a 4 code resistor. Most older resistors are 3 band code. Insert it into the R4 position. Let's go ahead and solder it. Inspect things, nice and shiny. Flowed through, nice and shiny. All right, I'm going to do the diodes next because they're nice and flat. And if you are working on a flat surface, it's a lot easier to keep all the flat things and get them done. Because otherwise, if we do the capacitors next, you're going to have a board like this, and it's going to be really hard to solder stuff. So let's do the diodes next. When I'm building things, I like to go from the smallest thing up to the biggest thing later. Anyway, let's do this D1 first. D1 is a 4148 small signal diode. In your kit, it's this little orange one right here. So this is directional. This does have a polarity, and you can see there's a little black band on the body. And on the silk screen, there's a little band on the silk screen. That tells us that this diode is going to go this way. So grab it, bend the leads down, not perfectly flush against the body. Not like that. And then insert it. And make sure, again, this is your chance to double check that you've got the polarity in the right direction. Push it down pretty flat. Don't force things, because this is a little glass cylinder. So, I mean, if you really manhandle it, you could break that. But hold it flush, bend the leads out, and that's our diode in position. Diodes typically are a little bit more sensitive to heat. Modern diodes, you don't really have to baby them too much, but back in the day you'd have to be really careful about applying too much heat to them. And I mention that because we are about to do a germanium diode next. So D2 is a germanium diode. It's a modern one, but they are a little bit more sensitive to heat. In your kit, it is this 1N34. So you can see the body is a little bigger. That just makes it a little bit more fragile. So don't bend the leads with any force right up next to the body. See, I bent the leads so that I've got a little room next to the body. So I don't want to introduce a lot of stress when I insert this thing. Now let's check the polarity. According to the silk screen, it's supposed to go this way. And then we're going to go ahead and insert it into this larger one. Again, don't force things down hard. Very nice. So, if you're so inclined, if you really want to get extra with this, you could attach a heat sink to it. Let me show you. I'm going to use this little alligator clip. I'm going to clip it to one of these leads. Let's do the top one first. What this does, again, be careful with this. You don't want to clamp it to the glass. What this does is this provides a huge thermal mass so that if I heat this up too much, this thing is going to act like a heat sink and heat up and dissipate that heat without letting it get to the diode. This is super, super not necessary. Just don't go crazy when you're soldering this stuff. Just figured I'd show you that in case you were curious. And then soldered it. See, if I didn't have that heat sink there, everything would have been fine because that was such a quick joint to do. I'll do the same thing here. Just clip it on. Boom. Again, not necessary, but I thought you'd think that was cool. Clip everything. So now we'll move on to the capacitors. There's only one value of capacitor in your kit. Just inspecting things real quick. There's only one value of capacitor in your kit. And it's these guys right here. So this is a 0.1 microfarad or 0.1 farad. Yeah, microfarad, right? Yeah, 0.1 microfarad capacitor. And again, these can go either way, just like the resistors can. So just insert it. And let's go ahead and do the other one too. Normally when I'm building these, I populate the entire board and then solder. That is a luxury I have because everything's nice and in line. But I'm just holding these flat to the board and then bending the leads out slightly. Nice. I'm happy with that, so let's go ahead and solder them in place. Clean off my tip. Beautiful. Inspect everything. Very nice and shiny. Now I'm going to clip. And we'll move on to the transistor. In your kit you have one transistor. The silk screen It's hard to see very well here. There we go. The silk screen has one flat side and one round side. Transistor has one flat side and one round side. I'll give you 2 guesses the direction that this is supposed to go. You may have to bend out your leads a little bit to make it fit in the holes. Beautiful. And don't, force it down, but, about like that is good. If it's giving you a lot of resistance, there's no need to push it down any farther. And then bend these 2 outer leads out just so it holds it in place. And then let's solder this as well. Back in the day, transistors were really sensitive to heat. Modern transistors, you don't have to worry about it as much again, but especially in these larger TO92 packages. But just something to be aware of. If you're holding your iron to it for like 15 seconds, then I'd start to worry. Alright, so this is your last chance to inspect your solder joints now that we're done with all the components on the board. Cool, I like it. Alright, let's move on to the rest of the pedal. Hello. Here's the inside of our housing. I'm going to set this aside for now. This is kind of where the real build tutorial starts, because if you're familiar with soldering and populating a board, the rest of what we just did was pretty trivial, pretty easy. Now comes all the weird little quirks and building tips that are unique to this Ain't Afraid kit. So here's what I like to do first. Power jack and then the battery, and then we'll build the rest of the circuit around it, just because those are usually a little bit harder to reach inside. So let's do the power jack first. Here is the DC jack in your kit. Take the nut off, insert it. I like to have this flat tab. I'm gonna get it. There we go. I like to have this flat tab up. So this bottom one is the battery positive. This top one is the board positive, and then this tab is going to be our ground. So go ahead and put this on. Tighten it as much as you can. This little thing is plastic, so don't really go, don't like hulk up and go crazy with it. Finger tight for now is just fine. I'm going to use some needle nose pliers just to like give it a little tweak. There we go. I'm not using a lot of pressure here, and I'm holding my finger really tight to the end just to hold it in place. Yeah, that's fine. Again, it's not super tight. It's tight enough to hold it in place. So let's do the battery jack. Here's the battery jack. The leads are going to be too long, so what I like to do is twist everything up. Beautiful, beautiful. Now that it's all twisted up, place it in the pedal where it's going to be. So it's going to be along this side and along this bottom corner, and I'm just going to lay the wire where I want it to end up eventually. So looks like I'm going to cut right here. When in doubt, remember that you can always cut too much off, but you can always go back and cut more later. But yeah, this looks good. So, little pro tip, I like to save these because we're going to use them a little bit later. If you throw them away, that's totally fine. You have plenty of wire in your kit for more of these, but I like these because these are just pretty much the length that I'm going to need in a little bit. Now strip these wires. I'm going to assume you know how to strip wires, so we won't go into super detail about that. I've got a few wire strippers. I got these, which are pretty beefy. I got these little ones that like reach in. I'll just use these for now. Give yourself about 2.5 millimeters of wire. It's probably about 4 millimeters actually. But that's plenty. And then give the wires a little twist, just to hold them in place. Beautiful. Now, this wire is, the battery positive is going to go in this bottom one. There we go. And you can bend it around if you want it to hold in place. So just get everything out of the way, put the wire about where it's going to be. So if it's bent in a direction that it's going to stay in forever, then when I solder it, it'll freeze it in that position. And I like that, so I'm going to go ahead and solder that in place. Let me adjust the camera to make it a little bit easier to see. There we go. Okay. Same with this. Heat goes on, I touch the lug and the wire, feed in a little solder, and then get out of there. Then inspect your joint. I'm not actually in love with that. Rolling it in the light, it does look good. Oh, you know what? That's totally fine. Yep, that's fine. And then if you have too much lead poking out, feel free to go ahead and clip the excess. So for this battery lead, go ahead and bend the negative terminal down and then put it in the top of our negative lug here. Don't solder it down yet. Just put it in place. We're going to be adding a couple more wires. Actually, I believe one more wire to this lug. So I'm going to leave the hole open for now. So just leave the battery, push it into place, just keep it out of the way. Okay, that's that. Is that in the hole? Yep, okay. In fact, to make a little quality of life improvement for myself, I'm going to get a little nice little stick or a little tiny screwdriver or something, and then bend this around so it's actually grabbing onto the hole that it wants to stay in. It will end up staying in, and then that's not going anywhere. That's a great mechanical connection. All right, let's move on to the rest of the pedal. Where did it go? Oh. There we go. So we're going to move on to this LED bezel next. It comes with a little plastic something, or other, and this little metal LED bezel. I believe in the kits I put the little plastic something or other in here like this just so you don't lose it. So first things first, take this plastic something or other out and then set it aside. We're going to need that later. You know what would be smart actually? Let me check to make sure all these holes are going to fit the components, because sometimes the hole gets drilled and then when the housing is powder coated, the paint is just thick enough to make things difficult to poke through. So let me double check that real quick. Let's do it with our LED bezel first. Okay, this fits through just fine. Let me do it with all the other stuff. I'll use my jack to test, for example. Oh, see, that pokes through just fine. This pokes through just fine. Okay, good. If these were tight at all, you could use a little sandpaper on the inside to rub it out, and it would be until it fits. I mean, we're talking about fractions of a millimeter clearance that you're going to need. But if this is tight to get in at all, you could just use a little sandpaper on the inside. I actually have this tool that Big Ear Pedals gave me. It reams out the inside of these holes. So if something was tight, you just give it a couple twists, and then all of a sudden things fit easily. And then really quick, let's make sure the foot switch will fit. Oh, you know what? This one is a little tight. This one is a little tight. All right, so I get to show you using my little reamer. I normally do this over a trash can, but I'm going to have to do it right here just to show you. So just, if you have sandpaper, just rub it on the inside. I have this tool, so I'm going to do that. Give it a couple twists. And now let's check again. And boom, it fits. See, I just had to shave off, you know, just a little tiny amount to make it fit. All right, so now that I'm comfortable that all the holes are going to fit, I know this potentiometer hole is going to fit, so I'm not going to bother checking that. Feel free to check that if you want to. Let's move on to the LED bezel. Take the nut and the washer off. And the washer is going to go under the nut. This is a little split washer that holds the nut in place. So even if you can't tighten it down perfectly tight, this tension will still keep this washer from moving. LED bezel is going to go down into this top hole in the top of the pedal. Hold it in place with your finger and put the washer on first. Washer on. See, if I were a really smart person, I would have done this before I did the power jack. But that's not going to mess me up at all. And then just thread it. See, this is so hard to do while I'm holding a camera too. Alright, there we go. There we go. Just thread it, tighten it down. See, it's still loose. I'm just going to tighten it as tight as I can, finger tight. And again, this is a tension washer in it, so it's going to hold it in place. I'll use a little needle nose pliers to give it a little twist if I can. Yeah, that's about as much as I could twist it. Again, it's not the tightest in the world, but it's never going anywhere now that it's in place. The reason I wanted to do that first is because I want this little plastic something or other out of the pedal, because I'm going to need that in a little bit. We're going to do our wires, potentiometer, and LED. So take this and set it aside, because we're going to need that in a little bit. Let's go back to our circuit board. Now we're going to start adding wires. And once the wires are added, we'll put the potentiometer and the LED on. Let's do these wires first, since I set them aside. Remember the wires I took off of the battery clip? I'm going to use these for my plus and minus 9 volt connection. So let's do the negative first. You'll see on the top, this is the silk screen for the plus 9 volts and minus. The silk screen is on the top, so I know I want my wires to go in through the top. I designed it that way because, you know, sometimes I'm brain dead and I can't remember. There are other holes with the silk screen on the bottom. That's because we're going to be inserting the wires in that end for right now, let's just worry about the battery power. So stick the black wire in. You can do one at a time. I'm just going to do both right now. And stick the red wire in. God, this is hard to do because I'm looking at the camera, not looking at my actual thing. All right, sheesh, there we go. And then I'm going to bend it down, hold them in place, and then just use gravity to hold them in place here. I have that helping hands, but again, I kind of want to show you what your workspace would be looking like. All right, finally, we're back to soldering, right? Excuse me, just drinking a little coffee here. So clean off your soldering iron tip, and then same principle as before. Heat goes on, feed in a little solder, heat comes off. Heat goes on, feed in a little solder, heat comes off. So that was a little wonky because everything was moving around. So make sure that you're happy with your solder joints on both sides. Everything is nice and shiny. I like those. So I'm going to go ahead and clip now. Not super flush to the board, you know, leave that mound. That's totally fine. Beautiful. And these are much longer than I need, but we can clip these later. So let's not worry about those for now. If you are cutting those lengths of wire off from the wire that I gave you in your kit, measure about 1 inch of wire for both of these. That's more than you need. All right, let's do the next wires. On the other side, you'll see that there's one side with an S and a T and one side with a TRS. This is the stereo input for the input jack, and this is the mono output. S refers to sleeve, T refers to tip, and then on this side it's the same thing except there's an R. R refers to ring. We'll talk about that in a little bit. For right now, let's just do these two wires. In my pedal, the circuit board's going to sit like this. So let's examine our mono jack first. I want my mono jack to sit like this. Oop, get it to focus. There we go. I want my mono jack to sit like this. So depending on the lugs of your jack, this one is going to be negative because see, it's hooked to the sleeve of the jack. So the black wire we're going to put in S in here is going to connect to here. And the T wire connects to this lug, and you can tell because look at the metal ring followed around to this little lug. So in a pinch, that's how you can tell which lug is the right one to go to. So I'm going, oh, I don't even need this stuff yet. Really, all I wanted to know was which lug is farther away from the board. This one's closer, this one's farther. The farther one, I'm going to give about a 3-inch wire to, so let's do that first. We said this was the tip, so let's get our red wire and cut a 3-inch section. I have my wire here, a little ruler. Cut it to be about 3 inches. Beautiful. I'm going to go ahead and strip my wire. I'll strip about 4 to 5 millimeters because this is going through the hole in the circuit board. For the other connection, For the sleeve connection, if I could get it to focus, see that one's closer to the circuit board. So instead of 3 inches, I'm going to do 2 inches. Because the 3-inch one has to go under the jack and come up. This one just has to go straight to the lug. So let's just do 2 inches of black wire for that. Here we go. Measure about 2 inches. Doesn't have to be exact. And I'll strip the end of that as well. Beautiful. All right, let's get started on that side. Here's my circuit board. Here's my mono output side. The red wire is my tip. And the black wire is my sleeve. Hold it in place and flip it over. Oops, did they move? Oh, they're good. And then let's get to soldering. Examine everything. Very nice. Very nice. And clip. Now let's do the same thing for this side. So instead of my mono jack, I'm going to get my stereo jack. Your stereo jack has an extra lug coming off of it. In my pedal, circuit board is going to circuit board is going to sit like this. So here's my 3 holes for my stereo input jack. I want my jack to lay like this. And the reason I want that is because this foot switch is going to be here, and that's going to, this won't be able to rotate any other way. So I want mine to look like this. So what lugs does that leave us with? This is the S lug. We can see because it's connected to the sleeve. This one is the ring lug right up here. And then this one is the tip lug all the way down here. So I'm going to give sleeve and tip 3 inches, and I'll give this one 2 inches. So I want one red wire 3 inches, one black wire 3 inches, and one another black wire 2 inches. All right, let's measure those. One 3-inch black wire, and one 2-inch black wire, and one 3-inch red wire. In your kits, you should have a foot of black and red wire. So you should have plenty of wire with a little left over for when you're done. And once we're done with these, we're going to be done with the wire too. So go ahead and strip a little end of these. Strip you. Strip you. And strip you. Twist the ends. Twist the ends. Twist the end. And just to double check, we know this is our tip wire, so T. But just to double check, when I put my jack in the way that I want it to end up going eventually, tip, sleeve, ring. Got it? So tip and sleeve are 3 inches. So that means my 2-inch wire is my ring. Tip, ring, sleeve. On the circuit board, let me get this out of the way. On the circuit board, on the underside, tip, ring, sleeve. So let's do tip first, ring next, sleeve next. When they're all nice and flat to the board, hold them, flip them over, and let's solder. So here's another little trick I like to do. We've got stuff poking out on the underside of this, and this doesn't want to lay flat. I'm just going to take something a little heavy and lay it on something just to hold it in place. There we go. And then drink a little bit more coffee. It's very important that you drink a little bit more coffee before you do this. It's been such a long day already. It's like, what is this? It's like 10 a.m. right now, and I've already had a long day. All right, go ahead and solder all these. I think this other wire moved a little bit, so I'm just gonna push it back up before I finish it. There we go. Let it cool before I move it, and then let's examine. Yeah, nice and shiny. And they're right up against the board. Okay, let's go ahead and clip. So that is all the wires done. We don't need to worry about wires anymore. I'm going to bend these down this way. I'm going to bend these down this way. Now that the wires are done, let's do the potentiometer. That's going to go in these 3 holes, and then we're going to do the LED. The LED is a little tricky, so pay attention to that. So grab your potentiometer. In the kit, I put the washer and nut on the shaft of the potentiometer. Go ahead and take those off now and set them aside. There's a little tab on your potentiometer. If I didn't break that off already, just take little clippers or needle nose pliers. You're not using the clippers to clip it off. You're just grabbing it and then give it a little twist. It's not really that hard. If you're forcing it, there's something wrong. Just back up. You just grab it, twist really quick, and that's it. And it came off. There's really only one way this can go. Just match it up to the silk screen, stick it in the holes, Bob's your uncle. If you have to, if in shipping like these have bent crazy, don't bend them back and forth a million times. Just kind of bend them till they're straight. Stick it in the hole. I like to flip this over and find a way to hold it in place. When I do this, I actually use helping hands that hold it in place like this. Again, I'm going to assume you don't have those at your disposal. So one thing I like to do is find a way to hold it, and then maybe like stack stuff up underneath it just to hold the board in place. And then do this middle one first. So this is a pro tip. Do this middle one. Just give it a little solder. And then what we're going to do is examine it. Is it nice and flat? Did it move around? Is it a little... like this is perfectly fine, but just for the sake of showing you how to do this, see how this is kind of a little skewed? I'm just going to hold it in place. Put a little pressure down on the potentiometer, and then let's just go ahead and reflow the solder. And now it's flat. Let everything cool down before you move. Okay, and we're done. So this is nice and flat to everything. Okay, so let's go ahead and solder the rest of those lugs. Every time I'm doing a potentiometer, I only do one leg, and it's the middle leg first, and then I examine things just to make sure everything is still aligned. Now that these two are done, I'm going to redo the middle one, add a little bit more solder. Just because I added a tiny bit of solder at first, just because I wanted to tack it down, but now this is my actual connection solder. Everything is nice and shiny. It flowed through to the other side. You could clip these if you wanted. I don't. Okay, that's it. Now let's move on to the LED. Again, this part is a little bit more tricky, so pay attention. This is your LED. Before you do anything, remember this little plastic something or other that we grabbed earlier? It's shaped like a cup. Put your LED in the cup. See? And there are two little holes that the leads poke through. And then it goes up like this. Make sure you've done that. I'll wait. All right, you've done it? Okay. Back to our board. This is the hole for the LED, right? This is the positive side, and the square one is the negative side. On our LED, yikes. On our LED, the long one is the positive side and the short one is the negative side. The short one is going to go in the square hole. The long one goes in the circular hole. Boom. We're done, right? No. Wait a minute. Pull it out as much as you can. I only want to solder a little bit of this because we're going to bend it into place. So once you've got it in the holes, pull it out until there's only a little bit sticking through. Just like that, see? Now solder it into place. Hey, before you solder, you put this little plastic thing on, right? Don't forget. And then just to double check, long side goes in the circle, short side goes in the square. Go ahead and solder. I like to do the short side first just because that has a little bit less room to work. So if I screw up the long side and it moves, I don't want this to come out of the hole. So just do the short side first. So now I'm happy. Go ahead and clip. And now check this out. I'm going to bend this in kind of a arc. Like that. The leads aren't touching. This little plastic something or other is on it, and now it's poking down. And then you kind of see what's going on here, right? The potentiometer and the LED, they're going to poke up through that. So beautiful. I like that. Now there's two things we could do from here. We could insert the potentiometer and the LED here and then put them into the jacks and then wire it up. I think it's a little bit, see, that's how I do it when I build them. But I think it is a little bit easier to go ahead and strip these wires and then wire up the jacks and then put everything in like that. So that's how I'm going to do it for this video. Go ahead and strip all the wires of the stereo side. I'm going to make these stripped wires just a little bit longer because they are going to go into lugs in a potentiometer. And look, I gave myself 8 millimeters now, which is much longer than we've been stripping before, right? Boom, nice and long. So twist these up. And then grab your stereo jack. And for the millionth time, examine it. Tip, sleeve, ring. Ring, tip, sleeve. Okay, cool. Let's do the tip first. See, I bent that down so it's making a nice mechanical connection. Oh, and by the way, the circuit board is going to go in the pedal like this, and the output jack is going to sit like this. So I want the red wire to go under, so instead of soldering it like this, I'm going to solder it like this. So it's kind of pointing like that. In fact, let me use the helping hands just so it's easier to see. I'm going to go ahead and solder this. This is a lot more metal, so feed in a lot more solder, and you might have to hold it to the metal a little bit longer because it'll take it a little longer to heat up. But once you're done, inspect things. I want the hole sealed up, and I want some solder on the wire, and I want everything nice and shiny. If you just poked your wire through and there's a bunch poking up and you want to clip it, now's a great time to do that. So this one is sleeve. That one was 3 inches as well. Double check. S, sleeve. This wire right here. I also want this one coming up from the same bottom direction, right? So poke it on through. Poke it on through. I'm going to bend things around so it makes a nice mechanical connection. Okay, let's get to solder. Beautiful. Nice and shiny, the holes covered up. Last wire. So logic dictates that this wire is ring, but why not double check everything? Ring. Ring. So this one I want to come around the top, just because that'll make my life a little easier. Oops, sorry, I'm off camera. There we go. This one I want to come around the top, whereas the other two came around the bottom. Again, if you have a different jack, just keep an eye on this. Make sure that your wires are leading to the right lugs. So this one's coming around the top. I'm happy with that. Let's go ahead and solder. I don't like his position, so I'm going to hold him, heat up the solder, and move him where I want him. There we go. Cool. So that is our input jack wired up. And then we can tuck these wires and make everything nice and neat when we install it. Let's move on to the output jack. Be sure you don't bend this LED accidentally, by the way. Output jack, this one's a little easier because there's only 2 lugs on this. So remember, I want my circuit board to sit like this, my output jack to sit like this. This one's sleeve, this one's tip. So let's strip these wires. Let's do tip first. Tip is the longer one, and I want it to go under. And the shorter one, the sleeve, I want it to go over. In the pedal, it'll be like this. So, tip, I'll go like this. Clamp it down. Heating my iron up again. There we go. Let's go ahead and solder everything. There we go. Beautiful. One thing to check is make sure solder came through the hole and made it to the other side. And then again, this sleeve is going over the top. If you didn't crimp these around, you could just stick it through the hole and just let it sit there. It's not amazing practice to do that, but if you're confident that it's making an okay connection, it's not going to move while it's cooling, that's totally fine. Okay, so that's those two. So now our input jack is going to sit like this. We are ready to put the circuit board in. Before we do that, I'm going to cut these 2 wires to about 1 inch and then strip the ends of it. It's a lot easier to strip them while they're outside of the pedal, because when they're inside, you gotta like reach in there and there's a lot of stuff blocking things. So I'm just going to trim these up. Trim these up to about 1 inch. And then strip a strip about 5 millimeters of wire. In fact, that's a little much, honestly. No! Oh, what a relief. That jacket of that wire came off. All right, hold the jacket of the wire and then clip. These aren't the greatest wire strippers. It's supposed to hold things really well right here, and it doesn't necessarily. Give things a nice little twist. And I'm happy with that. All right, let's go ahead and put this in. So, double check that everything is nice and straight. Make sure you took the tab off of your potentiometer. Now let's go ahead and insert things. So the potentiometer goes through this hole and the LED goes into this hole. That's the only thing you're going to worry about for right now. There we go. So my potentiometer is poking up here. My LED is just peeking through here. But what I'm going to do with the LED is seat the potentiometer. Oop, get your wires out of the way. Seat the potentiometer so it's nice and flat to the housing. And then take a little something, a little chopstick, a little screwdriver. And what you're going to do is push this little plastic something into the LED's bezel. And what that does is hold the LED in place. Beautiful. Don't force it. I mean, it should go in pretty easily. Nice. Looks nice and flat. It's holding itself in. Just flip it to the other side and make sure the LED looks okay. Now I'm going to put the washer and nut on the potentiometer. So straighten this out. Get the wires out of the way. There we go. And get your washer. And your nut. Hold the circuit board in place. Flip it over. Washer, nut. You don't have to tighten this down crazy. Finger tight is fine. Just keep the board from rotating and finger tight. We'll tighten up all the screws later, but as long as this is in the right position, this circuit board is going to keep it from rotating itself. Incidentally, on the circuit board, these are all quotes from Jessie that she said. So if you ever want to check those out, it's a nice little Easter egg that people don't know about. All right, next are the jacks. Take the nuts off the jacks, stick it in place. One thing to watch out for, make sure you don't pinch your wires in between the jack and the housing. Make sure it's nice and flush. Washer on. Nut on. Put it in a position where it is, I'm going to tuck these wires already. Rotate it so that this tongue is parallel to the face of the housing. And then I'm just going to hold this, tighten it a little bit. I'm not tightening it very tight. Once I feel a little bit of resistance, I'm stopping. I just want it to stay in place right now. And then, well, let's tuck the wires in a second. Again, nut and washer off. So on this side we have the battery clip to deal with. Maybe move that out of the way just a little bit. Poke the jack through the hole. See, this is a little tight. No! Hi. Ay, ay, ay. There we go. Poked it through. Everything's nice and flat. Now, this is a little tight. This is pinched underneath here. No wires are pinched between the jack and the housing, so I'm not too worried about that. I'm just going to move the battery jack. Wiggle things a little bit. There we go. All right, very happy with that. And then remember, I want this tongue to be parallel with the face of the pedal, because this area is going to be taken up by the face or the foot switch. So everything's flat. Oh my God, I shouldn't have trimmed my fingernails today. Washer, nut, go on. Same here. I'm just going to keep it from rotating and tighten it a little bit. I'm not going to honker it down very tight. Just as soon as I feel a little resistance, I'm just going to pause. Check the orientation. Now let's tuck the wires. You could use a little tiny screwdriver for this. I like using a chopstick for this stuff. I've just had this chopsticks for years because they're just so dang useful. But just tuck the wires nice and neat. See what I did there? They're out of the way. And I like that because if somebody opens the pedal, everything will be nice and inspectable. I can see if this is making a connection. I can see if this is making a connection. Let's go ahead and tuck this. I'm going to bend it here. Tuck it down. Tuck the battery lead down. And then tuck this down. Nice. Everything looks nice and clean. Let's do the power next. So remember these guys? Let's do the ground first, because that's a little trickier. Bend this lead down. Your battery should still be in this hole. If it's not, fix that now. Put the black battery lead in the negative hole. Then I'm just going to bend this down into place and put it down in the hole as well. They're both in the hole, and let's solder. Let gravity do its thing and flow things around and inspect. Nice. There's a little something down here, so I could clip that or I could leave it. I'm going to go ahead and clip it. And now the power goes in the only lug that's left. But just to check, there are 3 lugs, one the bottom and then this one on the side. It's this one on the side. Just in case you wanted to double check. And then solder that into place as well. Inspect. Beautiful. If you have a lot of excess to clip, you can clip that off here. Doesn't look like I have a ton, so. And then same with these wires. You can arrange them and make them look pretty too. Avoid bending wires too much because you don't want to break something. But nice. That is what I like to see. Everything's still seated. Everything's nice and tight. Guys, we're almost done. Looking good, right? I'm going to pause this video to make sure I don't accidentally delete anything, and then I'll be right back. Okay, I'm feeling good that I didn't delete anything yet. Let's go ahead and do the final part, which is the foot switch. Now this is really easy because I made a breakout board for it. Take your foot switch and take off all the hardware. There's a nut on the bottom, screw that to the very bottom position. If you look at your foot switch, there's this keyway. This will either go on the top or the bottom. I like to do the top just to keep things consistent. But you'll also see that there's a thinner side and a thicker side. Basically, you just want to make sure that these are flat and horizontal, not vertical like that. But again, I'm going to do the keyway to the top. So take your locking washer, put that over next. I don't use this plastic washer, but if you were going to use one, I'll show you what to do. Keyway to the top, insert it in the hole. If these jacks are oriented properly, should fit in without hitting anything. Now just flip it over. If you were going to use this plastic washer, now is the time you would put that on. If you don't use the plastic washer, when you use tools to tighten this down, just make sure you don't scratch the paint. This is in a good position. So just thumb tight is perfect for now. Make sure it's nice and straight, but don't hunker it down too tight, because if it's misaligned, then the ribbon cable is gonna have to bend to get into the holes here. Let me show you what I mean. Oh snap, you know what? I should have put this ribbon cable in before I did the whole kit. Well, you know what? Who cares? I'll show you what to do now. So, since I didn't do the ribbon cable before, stick it in and then pull it out slightly and bend it down. We're going to solder like this from the top instead. Let me find something to prop this up so that it's easy to see. Yeah, that was dumb of me. Otherwise, when this was still out, I would have stuck this in when we were doing all of the wires. This is a good position, so let me warm up my iron and solder this into place. If I hadn't done the power lines already, you could just take everything out and then put the ribbon cable in, but whatever, this is totally fine. I feel like there's too much light on this. Can you see? Yeah, I guess so. All right, let's solder these into place. I'm going to do one side. And then I'm going to do the other side, just so I know they're being held in place. And then just go in a line. tacking the opposite side ones down helps helps keep that cable from walking. All right, cool. Next, we're going to do the Footswitch board. So take this little cap off. This should be the last part you have. This is the Footswitch board. It's going to fit on here like this with the screen print up. So take the screen print. Hold it like this, like it's going to go on the switch, and then flip it over. See, like that. And then put it on. Let me do this again so it's kind of like you can see. It's almost as if you can see. And then same here, I'm just going to do opposite sides. And I'm not pushing down. In fact, if it's not seated, yeah, perfect. So see, this is a little crooked. I only did one side and then I did the other. If you want to make sure it's flat, now that I've got both sides tacked down, put a little pressure on. Boom, move it down. See, now they're nice and flat. Beautiful. And then go ahead and do the rest. In fact, now that it's soldered, I can bend it so you can see it. Inspect all those joints, give them a clip. Beautiful. All right, I'm sure you can guess what's happening next. Flip the Footswitch over, or flip the breakout board over, and it goes onto the Footswitch. Once it's on the Footswitch, it'll kind of pop off. You can use the tension in the ribbon cable to hold it on. That's it. We're ready to spaghetti. I like to tack down opposite sides first. It's also a good practice to not do these in a row. If you're going to damage anything, you could damage the Footswitch. Because if you heat this up for a long time, you could make these little lugs move in the resin that they're mounted in. Let me move the camera. That would be easier. Let me move the camera. There we go. This is so weird doing it with a camera and talking to myself the whole time. So I'm touching the pad and the lug, making sure it's all covered in solder. Be careful not to touch the ribbon cable or anything else as you're laying your iron down. Same here, pad and the lug, feeding it in, paint, solder on any other parts that have trouble getting it. Beautiful. And then just do the rest. I don't like to do them in a line because if this switch is closed, well, I mean, it's closed on one of these sides. So as I'm heating this up, it could actually be heating up the middle pin too because it goes through the switch. So I'm going to do this one and then move to a different line. It's an overabundance of caution, but, you know, can't hurt. Can't hurt to be careful. I'm going to wait a second before I do this middle one. Okay. Beautiful. Guys, that's the pedal done. We're done. This is it. So now's a good time to go ahead and tighten up any screws, rearrange any wires if you want things to be neater, make sure the LED is poking down, but let's close things up and go ahead and test our pedal. If you want to put a battery in, now's a good time to do that too. Let's close it up. So here's the lid. In your kit, oh no. Did I give you screws in your kit? Oh no. I hope I didn't forget those. Anyway, put your lid on. If I wasn't completely dumb, I gave you a little pack of screws. Oh no, I really hope I didn't forget those. So for a little inside baseball, I gave information about these kits out to 6 people, and we all built the kit together, but there's no packaging for this kit. I was just doing this off the cuff just because I had come off of that Rock Camp Kids soldering class, and I thought it would be cool to, do a kit with people because, why not? But it was a total experiment, so I've never run through this before, and running through this whole process was a way to make sure I had everything covered. So I did it really limited, only to people who were super interested in it and wanted to be guinea pigs. All right, you don't need to see this. You know how to tighten screws. Anyway, just build this thing. Just put the dumb screws in. Let's just go ahead and put the... Oh, I forgot about the knob. Okay, we do need to do this. This is a number 2 Phillips head, by the way, if you're wondering. It's always good to use the right tool for the job so you don't accidentally strip them. Okay. Now there's only one piece left in your kit, and it's the knob. So let's do that. Incidentally, if there's interest and you want to learn more about the kit, if you want to learn more about the specific circuit and what each component does, if there's interest in that, we could go over something like that too. So take the potentiometer knob, turn it all the way counterclockwise. In the knob, there's a little set screw. Back that out a little bit. All I want to make sure is this hole is clear, right? So I'm going to back it out a little bit. Oh no, it's already out pretty far. Now I'm going to put the knob on. Doesn't matter which orientation. Shouldn't have to force it, but it should be nice and flat. And now I'm going to rotate it. The knob, the potentiometer knob, is already as far as it'll go counterclockwise. So now I'm matching the knob to where it should line up, which is about to the top of this eye, roughly. Yep, right about there. And then I'm going to take a little flathead screwdriver and tighten this set screw. Now this is a little pain point that I've found. Don't tighten this like crazy. Just give it Just give it a little tighten. That's going to hold in perfectly fine. If you go crazy and try to tighten it down like crazy, you're going to strip this and you're never going to be able to get it out again. And trust me, once you start feeling resistance, that's going to hold in place really well. All right, that's it. That's the pedal done. So if you had any difficulties, feel free to send me some pictures. We could go through troubleshooting. But yeah, guys, that's the pedal. Now, go ahead and plug it in with a normal guitar pedal power supply. Use a battery and then plug in the input jack. It's not going to turn on unless something's in the input jack. And that's a good way to save battery, is why I wired it up like that. So I hope you had fun. Enjoy the pedal. Let me know how it goes. If you have any questions, again, let me know. I'm at rudetech.com on Instagram, and you can go to rudetech.com if you want to buy one of these kits. All right, see ya. Thank you very much for following along.